Last weekend, I spoke at an independent community camping festival called Onenessfest. And in my talk, I thanked the group for spending 3 days together, bonding, sharing their gifts, making their own food, exchanging their talents, supporting one another's art, and empowering the local businesses that were involved, all while getting to know the diverse members during music performances and ecstatic dance at night and conversations around campfires. These folks could have easily been spending more of their hard earned money to attend a corporate concert or fest, or been indoors somewhere in the air conditioning, maybe at a chain restaurant, drinking Monopoly coffee and buried in their devices. And to me, this scene is often lost when it comes to building the community prosperity so many of us want for our society. But the lazy method to making it a reality is believing a single politician who you don't know and who doesn't know you can save us from this spiral towards ecological collapse and social struggle. So casting a vote every 4 years, and that's it, is sort of like not brushing your teeth or flossing regularly until the day before your annual checkup, or living unhealthy and then expecting a doctor to fix it overnight. People who talk about the 1% versus the 99% are always saying we got to organize. Yes, a massive protest can raise awareness or stir up hope, but how does that really move the needle? The real change starts with self reflection and then the willingness to be disciplined and discerning with your lifestyle, and not always in a predictable, coordinated way, but in a very personal way that reduces your individual contribution to the status quo if you're unhappy with the status quo. I can't tell you exactly what that looks like because we all have different circumstances. I don't have children. You might. Therefore, our needs are different. But I hope you get what I mean. What does your time, energy, and attention feed? Madonna Thunderhawk was an activist in the 1960s and 70s and part of the American Indian movement, and the co founder of WARN, Women of All Red Nations. And she was instrumental in the broader civil rights and liberation struggles of that time and affected meaningful change. She wrote an essay, Native Organizing Before the Nonprofit Industrial Complex, which was featured in the literary collection titled The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. And here are some of her notes. Back then, we did not focus on fundraising, nor did we see activism as something we would get paid to do. Organizations today often have to spend so much time raising money for salaries, sending in reports, and schmoozing with funders that they spend more time on fundraising and administration than they do organizing. In contrast, we put all of our effort into organizing and activism. We did not organize on the basis of single issues. Today, you have groups that say only work on peace issues or only work on violence issues. They won't support your work if it's not specifically part of their mission statement. Back then, organizations were more focused on radical social transformation, so collaborations were more frequent. Activists helped each other out regardless of the issue. Over the years, it has changed the scope of activism so that nonprofits are just part of the system. She goes on to say activism is relegated to events. Many people will get involved for an event, but avoid rocking the boat on an ongoing basis because if they do, they might lose their funding. That's the end of those quotes. There are people whose hearts are really in the right place and are motivated by compassion within these organizations, and their organizations do make a difference. I want to be clear about that, and they make a difference in the lives of individuals with respect to the single issues like a food pantry, or a homeless shelter or a cancer resource center. They really do help those who are struggling economically or medically. But in the bigger picture, in a sick society or a sick system, they can only treat the symptoms, the externalities, or the casualties of the system. But nonprofits, as entities within the system, cannot truly change the whole paradigm. And no one organization can be the tide that lifts all boats. I mean, look at the UN, for example. Wasn't the United Nations, wasn't this organization supposed to be that? It's well funded, respected, filled with scientists, engineers, humanitarians, and bright minds from all over the world. They're visible with access to media, but they can't stop the machine. Back in 2015, the United Nations introduced the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which were a set of measurable, which are a set of measurable targets intended to improve global well-being and peace by 2030. Well, they were adopted by the leaders, adopted in quotes, from 193 countries. Now, 10 years later, just 5 years from the deadline, unsurprisingly, the reports reveal that only 17% of those targets are on track, with nearly half showing minimal or moderate progress, and over a third totally stalled or regressing altogether. And probably much worse on the peace front, as none of this organizing has ended the wars or geopolitical hostilities. When the reports align with or justify some project of the ultra rich, then they are esteemed, the UN, as an authority. And when their directives do not align, they're sanctioned by those with the power. So, this is the deeper message of, say, Audre Lorde's provocative essay, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." In this context, the house is referring to the system. The system is designed like a pressure cooker, that when the temperature rises enough, that valve opens up to prevent the pot from blowing up. Similarly, the system channels all your anger and hope somewhere within the system through the mechanisms of events and a voting day and giant registered nonprofit organizations that are all monitored carefully. And all these roads end up as cul-de-sacs with the outcomes already rigged by the ruling class. Also, it's not really the 1% versus the 99%, as we hear all the time. I would say that we have yet to arrive at 51%, a narrow majority who want change, who have elevated their consciousness and want freedom and equality for all, not just themselves, or not just for themselves and their family or club or race or religion or country only. These are all social constructs of identity and group identity that keep 99% of people fighting and blaming each other. This isn't a simple story of rich versus poor, white versus black, or men versus women. As you might have seen at the Bezos wedding in Venice, that was actually quite diverse in terms of gender and race and ethnicity, just not financially diverse. So these binaries I mentioned have their place, but they don't capture the true dynamic of our struggle today. The real division lies between those who desire universal human flourishing and those who consciously or unconsciously benefit from and protect systems of domination. The latter group cuts across every line. And to recognize this is not cynical, it's clarifying. And for me, it's even optimism. I'm just being diagnostic here. If we don't admit this, we cannot unite to get to that 51% of people who actually do seek collective liberation. Without that clarity, many in the so called 99% are those who may outwardly appear to stand for justice and true democracy, but ultimately uphold the status quo. And they continue to infiltrate and sabotage every movement. Social dominance orientation, or SDO, is a measurable trait that predicts a person's preference for inequality among social groups. And studies in psychology consistently show that a sizable portion of the population scores pretty high on SDO, particularly those in dominant social groups, but not exclusively. Even among those disadvantaged by the system, uh, many internalize dominance norms or aspire to gain status within the same hierarchy rather than aspire to an alternative system altogether. Population studies suggest that roughly 20 to 30% of people exhibit high SDO, so that automatically drops the so called 99% down to, say, 69, 70%. In every identity group, you'll find gatekeepers of power. The system can always recruit a Black person into power to uphold anti Black policies, or women who will champion patriarchy, or poor people who will stigmatize the unhoused, or LGBTQ folks who are pro war. Today, sadly, the only metric of true solidarity is loss. You can see now, like, students have been arrested, expelled, deported students, even the ones only calling for peace and um, demonstrating compassion. Adults have been fired and others banned from social media. I'm not saying that one needs to damage their reputation to prove their integrity. I'm saying anyone who has sacrificed themselves in the name of the good of the whole is probably sincere. Otherwise, whenever you're trying to calculate this 99%, you can't really be sure about others who could always be double agents for the 1%. And, anyways, for those who are marginalized and in lower social status, like most people now living paycheck to paycheck, it might make sense to advocate for universal human rights because they personally stand to gain from that. But that doesn't mean everyone in a lower position wants to uplift everyone, or that they wouldn't take the first off ramp if they become influential and can turn if the money is right. Another distraction is simply blaming everything on capitalism, or those insisting this is just late stage capitalism and it's going to play out and then we'll have a better world. We never had capitalism, only crony capitalism. At the heart of capitalism is consent, hence the term free market capitalism. So slavery doesn't fit the definition of capitalism. Gender and race and sexual job discrimination wasn't capitalism. Nepotism can't be capitalism. The government using tax money to bail out big banks isn't how capitalism works. That's crony socialism for the rich. And most of all, today, more tax money is taken than the people are good with. So that's not really consent, it's coercive. But especially for people barely making enough to pay these insane rents. And the tax money is used in ways that people don't approve of, further violating the principles of democracy and capitalism. Think of how so much of our money, our tax money, goes to fund war overseas. The double standard here is amazing. If those billions and trillions of tax dollars were spent on solving homelessness and the housing crisis in general, and getting real health care and affordable quality education that gives everyone a path to success and fortune. Well, many in the 99% will cry socialism and say that's the road to communist tyranny. But if instead you give it all away, grant it all to defend another country, or because we need to use your money to liberate another population from their repressive regimes, aka Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Iran, and to use that money to protect their human rights, um, and rights to safety and dignity and equality abroad, then that's not communism. That is just us doing the right thing, the ethical or morally responsible thing of pooling all our resources communally or socialistically to help our neighbors, albeit very distant neighbors in need, those who may be struggling somewhere out there. You see my point? Another central obstacle to organizing to become that narrow moral majority that tips the scales lies in our worship of false gods. Our idols in the age of crony capitalism have become the mega millionaire celebrities. Many working class people do not just consume celebrity content, they adore it. They follow these figures with fervor and mimic their lifestyles, buy their products, and defend them online with more passion than they defend their friends. Social media is flooded with millions upon millions following celebs, hanging on every word of athletes and actors and influencers and pop stars, most of whom are manufactured and elevated by big money, not grassroots efforts. People give so much of their money to billionaire artists to attend their concerts. I mean, these concert tickets are exorbitant, or corporate fests, which costs more than rent. Now, I just came across an AI rock band, which is amassing thousands of followers. And pretty soon, your dollars won't even go to rich artists, but directly to the moguls, the producers, without the headache of them sharing with any human artists or actors. We often forget that these celebrity figures are not anomalies or prodigies of talent or wisdom. Some, like elite athletes, they're exceptional in their domain. Others are simply born into fame, Nepo babies, straight to the front of the pop line. Either way, they have no secret to sell you for your health or beauty or longevity. Their real secret is time and time privilege. It's not what they do, but what they don't have to do. They don't have to overwork two jobs or care for sick relatives in the middle of the night. They don't lose sleep juggling childcare and rent. They don't eat processed food out of necessity or choose between a medical procedure and bankruptcy. Their bodies and wellness are not the result of miracle products. They are the result of rest, spaciousness, and access to everything. Time is their real luxury. Time to heal, time to train, time to rest and recover, time to become. Yet, many people in the 99% idolize these people, not realizing that they more or less serve the same symbolic function as the court jesters of the feudal age. And they're still nothing more than court jesters, entertainment sanctioned and subsidized by power at the top to distract the masses from the mechanisms of control. And then the billionaires, they're like the kings. You would think that those being crushed under the weight of inequality due to such a small number of people having abundance for 1,000 generations, that they would despise those sitting on top of the mountain. And some do, but many others, perhaps even half of the 99%, don't. They quote billionaires like sages. They treat them like prophets and their tweets like mantras. They aspire to become them and would enter their ranks in a heartbeat. They read their books, attend their events, and echo their philosophy about hustle and disruption and domination because the fantasy is intoxicating. But these elites, to be clear, they're not healers, they're not soothsayers or the poets of our time. This illusion is one of the strongest ideological weapons of the system because it keeps the struggling, hardworking people from uniting. Because you can't challenge a system you secretly hope will choose you. So long as we keep looking to celebrities, even politicians or billionaires, to lead us, the revolution will be stillborn. Revolutions can't be funded, they can't be televised, they can't be managed by nonprofits that must please their big donors and gotta solve the problem, um, or can't solve the problem. Because if they do, they would render their organization and their jobs obsolete. Or politicians who promise a lot, but they got to play by the rules of the system in the end, designed to reward compliance. I mean, just think of how many seemingly well-meaning politicians enter public service somewhere in the middle of the socioeconomic strata and come out in the 1% or near it. The revolution is relational. It's built on communities through mutual aid in shared meals, in collective care, in the gritty, invisible, often thankless work of trust building and truth telling. So, a crucial question for us is, can more folks say no to even some of their excess or comforts that are bought at the price of someone else's pain or exploitation? We don't need celebrities. We don't need saviors in this struggle. We need each other. And we need just enough to recognize each other. So, this isn't for everyone. This message will not be embraced by 99% of folks, and that's okay. It isn't meant to be. But don't believe me. Believe what's in your heart. Believe in community. Believe in the earth. We don't need to follow anyone. We just need to live in truth. That's why I commend spontaneous action, personal growth, and real transformation, as well as a return to true community. So, what is true community? Let me begin by describing what it's not, what is not the nature of community, because it's falsely trained in us to mean homogeneity. A corporatized monoculture now dominates life. Many young people, especially those I talk to when I'm working with adolescents in therapy, especially suburban youth, they're now socialized into believing that a community is undeveloped if it doesn't have a Starbucks or a Chipotle in town. Any vegans or vegetarians notice that every veggie burger in America is now an impossible burger? And what the heck is it even made of? And the devices all have everyone staring into their hands. And big tech has funneled all of the attention in those devices to just a few sites so that independent websites are largely obsolete or fraudulent and therefore scary to us or risky to enter. Author Henry Miller said, "The language of society is conformity. The language of the creative individual is freedom." And the psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna said, "Culture is a plot against the expansion of consciousness. And the mystic U.G. Krishnamurti said, nature is busy creating absolutely unique individuals, whereas culture has invented a single mold to which all must conform. It is grotesque. Those are strong words from all three, but accurate. Now, this orients us to what true community means, which is unity in diversity, especially diversity of thought and ideas, where robust and transparent dialogue can flourish. Let's look at some metaphors. Community functions as a mirror. In community, we meet the parts of ourselves we would otherwise miss or avoid. Every kind of relationship, even if it's not a full on community, but every kind of relationship is a mirror held up to ourselves. You will know that if you're ever in a serious or committed relationship. If I have access to two mirrors, then I can see the back of my head for the first time. And it's the only way I can continue to examine that otherwise hidden part of myself. And this is also how community functions metaphysically. Being in spiritual community is a kind of mirror meditation, the friction, the joy, the validation, and the discomfort. Um, it's all stirred up in us by others. And it's all part of what we mean by communing and mirroring. Another metaphor is the forest. Just as a forest is not one tree identically repeated, but a congregation of all different ones, maybe sharing a somewhat arbitrary classification, but totally different heights and shapes and designs, with all this difference maintaining the ecological balance. So again, community isn't built on sameness. Um, and when looking at scales of this, coming all the way down to the individual, you are not just you, but you as an individual are also another community, because our bodies contain more microbial cells than human ones. I don't know, it's something like 10 to 1. So trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses, healthy and unhealthy, but it all regulates or impacts our immunity, our mood, our digestion, and even cognition. Health then isn't your solo endeavor. It's not really even an ecosystem that you host, but one that hosts you. And the mind is a kind of strange loop in all this biological community, because your brain is composed of billions of neurons firing according to physical laws, but somehow in the midst of all this, it generates thoughts and the sense of I. And so consciousness may be a recursive phenomenon where awareness folds back onto itself, where the brain tries to know itself. And obviously, the conscious decisions that you make alters the whole system, which then alters the you that you feel is you. So community reflects this loop-like structure. The group shapes the individual, and the individual reflects back on the group. Through self-awareness and contribution, the, the whole group transforms. It's not a linear hierarchy, though. It's a feedback dance. If our communities become more contemplative, this can become a spiritual Ouroboros, a community waking itself up through the awakened parts within it. Metaphysically, there's no final level, no master vantage point in the community, only participation. So the universe has wrapped back around itself to become aware of itself in you. Let me give you another example of this. In Yellowstone National Park, back in 1995, wolves were reintroduced, after a 70-year absence. Their return caused a trophic cascade that transformed the entire ecosystem. The wolves reduced the deer populations, which changed their grazing behavior. Then vegetation, especially willow and aspen, grew back along riverbanks. And then that meant birds returned and beavers could build dams. Then the shape of the rivers stabilized. This restructured the behavior of the water. So think of your own life and your circumstances. You may be both the cause and effect in 1,000 traceable ways. Now, in spirituality, unity becomes meaningful only when contrasted with the illusion of separation. There is no one without the idea of not one. For fish in the ocean, there's no question of how many waters are there. For them, it's what the heck is water. So there's not even one ocean. Similarly, there's no silence without the memory of sound. Otherwise, it's not even sound. Just as there's no sight or blindness for the elbow. For the spiritual seeker, there is no union without the ache of longing. There's no such thing as God, even without forgetting God and remembering again. Finally, because there's such a thing as community, someone has to play the archetype of the outsider. Think of Prometheus or even Judas. The question becomes, is this person harming the container or exposing something the container doesn't want to face? This is the language battle in the media uh, that we see today. And this requires immense discernment. Some disruptions to the community or the society are toxic, but others are initiatory. Here are some reflections for you and any community to conclude with. Is the presence of the outsider dangerous or merely uncomfortable? Discomfort is not always a reason to exclude. Is harm ongoing and unrepentant, or is there a willingness to engage or reflect and transform? Are your boundaries being set to protect or to punish? Can you set boundaries without blame? The long arc of belonging includes retreat, but does it have to include abandonment or permanent exile? The first head of any world religion was Bahi Khanum. I believe she was the third leader of the Baha'i faith in the early 1900s. She has a powerful quote about forgiveness. To be hurt and forgive is saintly, but far beyond this is the power to comprehend and not be hurt. I think that is rooted in knowing that the one who harms others hasn't won anything. But why not? Because what we call gain, wealth, power, prestige is only a gain in the realm of time. And time, as we know it, is an ever dissolving currency. Life in the body is so fleeting that to call anything permanent is its own kind of spiritual mischief. The trophies of people's deceit or the rewards of their oppression or the applause of the ego, all of them, all of these are sandcastles at the edge of the tide. Every worldly achievement, including fame, is like riding on water. That's why the mystics don't measure anything by outcome, but by alignment, and why you need not envy what people have temporarily through collusion with dark forces. We don't know how anybody has what they have, um, and what they get from forfeiting their integrity. Nor do we need hatred for this, but understanding. And we need to work on our personal growth in contribution to the health of the community. The legendary Japanese samurai and philosopher who I talk about sometimes on this podcast, Miyamoto Musashi, had a saying: aspire to be like Mount Fuji with such a broad and solid foundation that the strongest earthquake cannot move you, and so tall that the greatest enterprises of common men seem insignificant from your lofty perspective. With your mind as high as Mount Fuji, you can see all things clearly, and you can see all the forces that shape events, not just the things happening near to you. So we rarely consider eternity. And when we do, it's often as a kind of extended timeline, a linear stretch into the infinite. But eternity is not more time, it's the absence of time, which is sometimes called the eternal now for lack of language to express it. Well, from that reality, what we call life is not a duration at all, but merely a flash, the briefest window, a momentary portal where the individual soul has the rare chance to remember what it truly is. All religiousness aside, and just speaking scientifically, even, human consciousness is either a flash of somethingness against eternal nothingness, or a spark of you-ness against the fire of allness. To be obsessed with this locus of selfhood is like trying to tan yourself with a candle at a sunlit beach. Clinging to the ego sense, which is attachment to any identity, is like polishing a mirror to catch a glimpse of the sky.